Hey guys, welcome back to Digital Artcast. Another episode coming at you from Bonnie, Scotland in the UK. My name is Gordon Neal. I'm here to entertain and educate you guys on some of the biggest artists in the industry, and of course, just talk about life in general, art in general, and hope that it informs and makes your day a little bit better. There's a couple of artists that I've had on a kind of hit list of mine for a while. I'm kind of working my way through them. Most of them comprise from my experiences at Trojan Horse in 2018. A lot of the speakers I saw there, and a couple of the guys that I met during the event. This artist that I'm about to bring on was one of the key speakers at THU 2018, where he talked about his overall career and his experience working in VR recently as well. I've tried to get him on for a little while now, but obviously scheduling conflicts, as it always happens with most of the bigger artists, trying to get him on because he was busy or he was tied in something else. But finally, he's managed to come on today to talk to us about his career and hopefully some bits and pieces and snips of what he thinks the future of VR art is going to look like, since he is probably one of the foremost experts at the moment in that field. So please welcome along my guest for today. That is Gio Nakpill. Hi Gio, how's it going?
Pretty good. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, of course, man. It's a pleasure. Thanks for giving up your time for coming on today. So funny thing, we were talking about this just before we started recording, but this is your first ever podcast.
Yes, it is. So I just recently did my first ever live stream with Pixelogic, and so I mean, the more social aspects of being an artist online has always been intriguing to me, and live streams and podcasts, one of them, have always been sort of on my hit list of things to do. Yeah. So
yeah,
thank you for this.
Yeah, of course, I'm honored, man. It's definitely. I think it's also kind of weird sometimes where you get the instance of some of the bigger artists in the industry that have had a lot of exposure, but then, at this point, if I'd interviewed anybody else or most of the people that are kind of been around for a while, they would have done some variation of this. But then, of course, you've probably done a lot of talks or maybe just demonstrations at events. So this is like just your first podcast, but you've also done a lot of teaching or talking or like even THU. That was that like a first thing for you as well, or?
Oh no, I've done a lot of workshops and more sort of presentation type stuff in front of people, which which I love doing. I think kind of more of sort of this type of setup has been lacking in sort of my experience. And recently I've been told that Discord or OBS and now this thing we're using here have been great for such things as podcasts and live streams. So it's just good to be educated overall. Like I think I'm always game for learning new things, and if I am to be doing this more live streams, I really want to kind of research the process and what programs to use. So this is sort of my beginning stages in exploring that world. So
yeah. Well, I mean, you've got my contacts anyway, Gio. So I'll be happy to help at any point you need any information. So So again, just before we kind of dive into the nitty gritty of what you do, for those who are unaware of your past accomplishments, can you introduce yourself and give a little brief history on who you are and what you do?
Yeah, so my name is Gio Nakpill. The last name's pretty hard to pronounce, but you actually pronounced it quite perfectly.
Yay!
So, props to you on that one.
Indeed, thank you.
So I'm an art director at Oculus right now. In my previous life, I was I was in the visual effects industry. Spent 12 years at Industrial Light and Magic, where that was sort of like my dream job, essentially. Kind of just growing up in the movies that they've worked on, Star Wars, all you name it, the familiar list for a lot of us in this industry, right? So getting to work there was really a life-changing point in my career. So I was there for about 12 years, worked on many, many, many films with many directors and movie franchises that really formed me as a kid.
Mm-hmm.
And in particular, the last movie that I worked on there was the Avengers. I was able to supervise the creature build for that show, as well as was given the opportunity to build the Hulk.
Yes.
Uh, I mean, one aspect of it, I mean, I had a team of people, but I was able to build the actual topology, the
Mm-hmm.
sculpt, a lot of the facial shapes, body shapes. So it was a very involved process of bringing that creature to life, which, shaved off a lot of years in my in
Well,
me. But
that was interesting as well, I think, because for me as a viewer, when I first saw um, the Avengers version of the Hulk, it was interesting because I think it was one of the few Hulks I'd seen that was very like a likeness of the Banner model. So it was the first kind of Ruffalo Hulk that we saw, where
yeah,
a lot of its facial features were built into the Hulk, whereas previous Hulks had a more, I think, generic look, and this one had obviously had to reflect Mark's face at the time, because they wanted
hmm
to see more up. Was that because they wanted to bring him through in the Hulk and have a more relatable origin for him?
oh yeah, most definitely. That was one of the main um, goals that Marvel
Hmm.
stated, and that
Yep.
was internally too within our team at ILM. That
Yep.
was pretty much, if we don't achieve that, then we failed essentially,
Okay.
because I think, yeah, that was a very important aspect of his performance to get Mark Ruffalo's face grafted onto the Hulk, so
Right.
you still see it, and it was a very tricky endeavor to actually really pull that off. But we started off with making sure that the actual digital double of Mark Ruffalo was on point,
Hmm.
and me working with the Marvel art directors and our
Hmm.
internal team,
Yep.
we did a lot of due diligence to make sure that as we built up the Hulk face from that, we retained
Yep.
a lot of what was important on Mark, which were obviously the eyes, but also Mark has a very asymmetrical face because he had mentioned to me when we were doing a light stage capture
Hmm.
one time that he had a stroke early on in his life, and so uh, I believe it was the left side of his face was not quite as mobile as the other side. So whenever he would blink, for example, the other side would incite more muscular activation than the other, and it's very
Okay.
subliminal when you look at it. But with knowing that, I I actually put that into the Hulk facial library, and it really worked. I think a lot of what made people think it looked like Mark was a lot of it had to do probably with more of the way in which that asymmetry was with even the facial
Ah.
movement. So yeah, it was very interesting to kind of like learn more about that stuff while working on that
Interesting.
creature. Yeah, it was a
Yeah,
good
it was
project.
interesting.
Hmm
No, indeed. I think I caught a kind of retrospective about Mark at one point, and I think the guy's not had an easy life as an actor. It seems to have been he's had been through quite a few things in his time as with his time in Hollywood anyway.
hmm
But yeah, it was great to see part of that anatomy captured in the film. I think it did bring the Hulk to life. I think it almost humanized him in a sense where he's almost seen as this killing machine constantly. But then I think with the take you had, it brought him more down to earth and made him feel more part of the team than just a loose cannon, which I thought was really interesting. So,
Yeah,
um,
yeah. I mean
props to you on that.
that was easy because he has a very like friendly face and approachable. So that
Yeah.
contrast of like when he's at the fault as the Hulk, not
Yes.
angry or anything, or hulking out.
Yeah.
He actually it feels like an approachable creature. But then when he hulks out, once that contrast happens, that's why it's a very interesting character, because from calm to rage, you see that
Mhm.
gradient, and he's not always like fully flexed angry all the time hulking out.
Yeah.
But yeah.
Yeah. But then you look back at your movie credits in general at ILM, the things you got to work on, and it definitely, you know, fills me with the jealousy of most people because there's some franchises you've worked on that's just, you know, some, for instance, like, you worked on some of the prequel Star Wars. I think it
Hmm.
was episodes 2 and 3, which a small minority of the guys in Hollywood have kind of been part of. So that's like a almost a badge of honor at this point. And then of course the Matrix films, Pirates of the Caribbean, some of the Mission Impossible stuff.
Hmm.
So I mean, there's just this whole list really of some of the most defining eras in cinema that you've kind of steadily followed along as they've came out, and that must that must blow your mind at some point, thinking that you've had your hand in these genre defining films that have came out, and you were kind of at the forefront of at the time, helping with defining their vision and helping with that artistic view.
Yeah, I mean that was the luxury of working at a place like ILM, where it was one of the go-to places for such movies. Or
Hmm.
I also got the chance to work at ESC for the Matrix films.
Yeah.
When I was laid off at ILM early on. But
Hmm.
yeah, no, I mean, I think it just at a certain point, I mean, I still would pinch myself, like say for War of the Worlds, when Spielberg decided to get back into sci-fi after
Hmm.
such a lot. I think his last sci-fi movie he did was E.T.
Oh
Prior
wow.
to. And
Yeah.
I was given the opportunity to build the tripods. I was just like, holy cow.
Oh,
Yeah, so
cool.
there were definitely many moments, or seeing my name on the credits with John Williams' soundtrack at the end of episode 2.
Wow. Yeah.
But after a while, it just becomes sort of like, okay, I mean, after 12 years of working there, you just kind of end up loving the process versus the project.
Right.
I ended up loving working with people, or
Hmm.
the new challenges that were given to us, like,
Hmm.
how do we, for pirates, pull off these super detailed um, creatures,
Hmm.
and then we all started using ZBrush for the first time to get all of the displacements, because prior to that we didn't have any way to sculpturally pull out the detail. It was all through paint.
Okay.
So it just suddenly became more of like, rather than like, oh, the geeky aspect of working on this director's film, who I've loved since the kid. It became more of like, oh my gosh, there's this creature that they want me to do. It's designed by Carlos Huante for a not so well known film, but it's designed by Carlos Huante, and the creature looks amazing.
Wow.
So
Yeah.
it became more of that. It morphed into that as I started working there for a long period of time.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, awesome. Awesome. So then you had this kind of huge movie career behind you at this point. You'd worked there for 12 years. Obviously, you'd done stuff before ILM as well. You can't kind of just appeared there. You had a
Hmm.
life beforehand.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah, for sure.
but then you've almost had I don't want to use the word jack of all trades, but then as you worked early on, sculpting wasn't your initial focus, right? That wasn't your day job from day one, right? You did do other things within the industry, within ILM.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, even before ILM, my focus has always been scattered. I mean, you could say, yeah, jack of all trades.
Mhm.
Uh, like when I was in Toronto, I was working in some post production facility dubbing
Mhm.
tapes, and I thought that was going to be my career. You
Right.
know, and then graphic design for a multimedia company,
Mhm.
uh, and then and then I kind of switched my focus a little bit more for like towards like hard surface modeling. I was at DNA Productions in Texas. I had the opportunity to work on Jimmy Neutron there as more of a hard surface modeler,
Nice.
and then I did a
Cool.
contract for a game company where I did like 200 spaceships, just concepted, designed, and some creatures, and designed them and built them in 3D. So it wasn't
Nice.
really until ILM, and even at ILM when I was hired there, I was hired as a hard surface modeler. Oddly
Okay.
enough, because most of the work in the portfolio I had were mostly characters. So, but I
Right.
think episode 2 was the first project I had there, and they didn't really have any characters for me to work on. So they
Mhm.
had me learn like Alias Studio, NURBS modeling,
Right.
which was very very intimidating. But yeah, I was doing that, and I had to really prove myself to them that I could do characters, because at that point in ILM's lifespan,
Yeah.
the artists there were pretty much, if you're a hard surface modeler, you were pegged as a hard surface modeler,
Right.
and I really had to kind of prove myself that I could do characters,
Hmm.
and yeah, I just was able to luckily impress the right people who believed
Hmm.
in me and pushed for me, to start working
Cool.
on characters. Yeah.
Nice, nice. So then, of course, you done the whole stint at ILM. You had your whole career behind you. Then, um, did you go? Was it like an immediate move from ILM to Oculus at the time?
Oh no, I went to Valve actually
Oh, okay.
before Oculus.
Oh, interesting.
Valve, in fact, was in the picture even before ILM. Uh,
Okay.
so I was early. It was early on in Toronto.
Hmm.
I believe that they contacted me.
Right.
This was like, I think, after Half-Life One or something,
Oh, wow.
or
Back in.
Counter Strike. Yeah, this is like back in the day.
Yeah.
So I was like wet behind the ears. I didn't have any experience, but I had a website on GeoCities, which had some of
Hey,
my early explorations in 3D Studio Max, and
nice.
or yeah, 3D Studio Max or 3D Studio 4, whatever. And
Yeah, yeah,
they saw it. A gentleman there contacted me, Bill, and he saw it, and then they had me fly up there in Kirkland for an interview, and it was one of those, like, you know, famous Valve interviews where it's like super hard. And luckily enough, I was able to get in, and
okay.
they hired me, but I did not have enough experience to qualify for a TN visa, I believe. But I mean,
Ah,
to
okay.
their credit, man, I mean, this is why I love Valve. Like, they
Mm,
really worked to try and get me that visa back
mhm,
then, and I still remember that to this day. Like, I
mhm.
appreciate the effort that they were willing to give this, like, no name kid, no
Yeah.
experienced kid, a chance. But so that
Mhm,
didn't end up working out, and but at the back of my head, I've always kept them as sort of like, man, eventually I'd want to work there, and then
mhm.
Valve from that became the Valve that they are now, with
Yep.
Steam and all that stuff. And so, yeah, when I felt like I was feeling very stagnant at ILM, having been there for
Mhm.
12 years, working like after Avengers, they were like giving me like the pick of the litter, like, oh, just you could have whatever show, we want you to work on this show, that show. But I
Cool.
just felt like it's run its course in me.
Yeah.
I wasn't feeling scared anymore. I mean, when
Right.
I say scared, it's just that sort of feeling of anxiousness
You were
of
getting
like,
comfortable?
yeah, exactly. So
Yeah.
I think I always want to feel that sense of, the ground's not always like in place. You have to actually be alert and are able to react to things. And
Yeah.
so I felt like I was not doing that at ILM. And also I was looking at uh, the landscape of the industry.
Mhm,
As an artist, I was looking at what I was doing there, which was very specific. I was just building characters, which was
mhm.
amazing. Building the most sought after characters, but I
Right.
wasn't really expanding a lot of the other aspects of what I feel I could be of value to the industry. And
Mhm.
so, and I felt like that was in the realm of real time and games. So
Right.
I've always wanted to make that transition at some point. And after Avengers, I'm like, well, this will be my swan song, like leave on a high note. And so, I contacted Valve, and hoping that they would still be interested in me, and thankfully they were. They ran me through the interview again, which was really really hard. But yeah, so I was there for about close to 2 years, I think.
Okay.
Yeah, close to 2 years, and it
And
was
can
an
you
amazing
talk
time.
yeah,
Mhm.
I can imagine, but then could you talk about at all what you worked on, or was that something that didn't see the light of day, or
I don't know what Valve's policy is about, like, talking too much in detail about the culture there, but I mean, I worked
Okay.
on, like, some of the games. So I kind of want to not touch too much on that because I don't want
That's fine.
to.
So good, Gio. So
I just
good.
want
Just
to be respectful
yeah.
of that,
No, no.
not
It's
asking
just
them
always
for stuff.
interesting to find
Mm,
if you knew what you were doing there, it would have been interesting just to see how
yeah.
they utilize your skills. But then of course, you were there for just under 2 years, and then were Oculus fishing for
Mhm.
you at the time as well, or was that did you approach them or?
Yeah, no, so Oculus, well, I was contacted by Oculus,
Hmm.
and I was like, oh, yeah, I've always been trying to keep up with the VR scene, especially during their Kickstarter days.
Hmm.
That was sort of big. So I was always intrigued. I mean, VR for me has always been a staple in sci-fi, right? Like, and
Yeah,
being a fan of sci-fi, I've always been like, man, I'll never see this in my lifetime. And then,
of
boom,
course.
Oculus is here.
Yeah, yeah,
So yeah, so they all they had to do to it was really tough leaving Valve because Valve is like the Shangri-La, in my opinion, of
oh
the
wow.
industry. Like if you're there, like yeah, I'm gonna be here for life, and that was my plan. But yeah, a part of me again was like, well, not that I was feeling comfortable at Valve, far from it.
Yeah,
There was a lot of things to learn. A part of my gut was saying that maybe you'd want to get into this thing that's kind of bubbling up here. This new thing called VR,
right.
and a part of me was thinking, yeah, this sounds like something I cannot that I will kick myself over if I missed out on this one,
Yeah, makes sense.
This Oculus opportunity. And so, yeah, I pretty much took a gamble by leaving Valve, and in my opinion, the gamble paid off. I mean, I'm right now doing art in virtual reality using Oculus Medium, and that's like I'm in heaven,
Yeah,
working in VR right now in the art scene,
of
sort of
course.
being on the forefront of that. Yeah.
Well, I think yeah, I mean, definitely, I agree with you, and everything you're saying. I think especially Oculus has been definitely at the forefront as much as Valve has as well, of course. But then again, I think with Valve, the focus was more on either generalization or gaming, whereas I think Oculus has definitely had the app feel from the very start. They've definitely been focused on pushing creators, and then of course Medium came along and has taken off at this point. It's spawned a life of its own with the tools that are now available. Even since I think its inception, when I first saw it, probably about 2 or 3 years ago, to where it is like today. Like as software obviously always evolves and the user base changes, people do amazing, interesting stuff with it. But I think the results that people are able to get through using Oculus has been really impressive, especially the stuff that you showed at THU, and then even beyond that you've done, is interesting because I think for a long time ZBrush almost held its own in multiple spaces, and I don't think it felt like it was ever going to maybe be challenged. But now, there's apps like, of course, Medium, but even stuff now like Forger on the iPad, which
Mm.
also holding a flame to ZBrush. But then, of course, VR is a very unique space. So it's a big subject to break down. I don't know how you want to dive into it, but maybe even talk about, if you can,
Mhm.
what your first early experiences were of VR and using Medium.
Oh, yeah. And I always tell this story, in my workshops. Like when
Yeah.
I first started using Medium, I actually hated it.
Okay.
I was like, what the hell? You can't control. There's no control.
Yeah.
How are you able to control this thing?
Mhm.
So I actually put it down for I don't know, like several months, 6 months, let's say,
Okay.
um, of just like yeah, it's like trying to sculpt with whipping cream or something, right? Or whipped cream.
Yeah.
And then at the back of my head, like, man, Gio, you gotta, because my philosophy has always been like, yeah, fuck, ZBrush was hard to use. Like, it
Yeah.
took me a while to get my ZBrush legs, but I pushed through it, and like I got
Mhm.
comfortable, and then there was that moment of click where, oh man, yeah, definitely it's on now. So I wanted
Yeah.
to, at the back of my head, okay, let's do that with Medium. Let's see if you can actually achieve that in Medium, because at that point you have to remember early on. it was a very limited set of tools. We did not even have any move tool or a lot of the additional tools that work well for form control now. And so it was a struggle. Like, I mean, it still took me some weeks to really kind of figure out a process of getting control there. And there were other artists like Sam Poirier. Oh, God, Sam, I'm sorry for mangling your name, but one of the most amazing artists, Sam Poirier,
Yeah.
uh, also working in Medium, and there was
Yep.
Bayard. So there was a bunch of us who were kind of
Like
really,
pioneer.
yeah, pushing it. And then so I was just messing around with different techniques and was able to come up with workarounds. And through those workarounds, it suddenly became the essential uh, sort of process for me to get the best forms, even to this day, which was interesting. Like, it went from a workaround to like, oh, this is the process for me.
Oh wow.
So yeah, so in short, yeah, early on was a struggle, but I just kind of tried to push through it, and and then I got excited, and then in my head, like, yeah, I definitely want to make it a mission to help evangelize that this tool right here is something viable for artists to use, not as a replacement for ZBrush. I've never once sold it as that, and it should never be sold as a replacement, but as just an
Yeah.
addition to the toolkit of any artist, because
Hmm.
ZBrush will have its own set of advantages that Medium doesn't, and
Yeah.
vice versa. Medium will have its own set of advantages that ZBrush doesn't. And so, with
Hmm.
that in mind, I was just like, trying to do things that show the potential of the software. Like,
Hmm.
okay, well, you guys don't think you can do detail?
Hmm.
I'll prove you wrong. I'm going to do a dinosaur with scales or whatever, right? Or anatomy. You
Yeah.
can't do subtle anatomy. Well, look at Sam's work, and here I'll do one too. So yeah, it's been really fun to kind of be in that scene, helping the Medium team to kind of to blast the software out there so more people are aware of it, and they should be,
Hmm.
in my opinion. If you're a character artist or someone who is interested in digital content creation, this thing cannot be ignored, in my opinion.
Yeah.
It's
And
good
and
for
we
you to
were
consider it.
Yeah, definitely, and I feel like for VR especially as a consumer, I knew that one of the early barriers of entry was not only the computer but also the headsets were initially very expensive and
Mhm.
only kind of available to a select few. Whereas again, before we started recording, we talked exclusively about the Oculus Quest and how that. For me, especially, has almost changed the landscape because again, we were talking about Yama Yurev, who was using at events, he was kind of just throwing the quest on people's heads and showing like how easy it was. No wires, no computers. You could just dive into a sculpt or any kind of app or work without that tether. So has that been for you game changing? Also, do you feel like that the tools are now getting to a point where it's almost like not invisible, but they're more in the background than they were initially?
I haven't really been using the Quest. I've been using the Oculus Rift S right now, which is
Right,
still tethered. But I mean, the way in which I work is I like to stand in one place anyway. Like,
right.
I mean, yeah, sometimes I kind of move around
Mhm.
the model, but I right now I'm kind of like I'm really happy with the Rift S, and
Yeah.
I've heard people use Quest with a link cable, but yeah, no,
Mhm.
I mean I'm cool right now. Like, I'm
Yeah.
not really a gamer, like,
Yeah.
or anything, so I'm in
Yeah.
VR because of art. That's
Yeah.
pretty
Of
much
course.
my main use case for it
Yeah.
right now, at
I think
least. Yeah.
the Rift S is definitely like the next level for a lot of people because the headset is not only super powerful but also very affordable. And I think
Hmm.
that's why people are also getting it. I think the Quest, for me, I see it as a mobile production studio where people have Yama again, for instance, has been taking it to events and showing people how easy it is
Yeah,
to
it's convenient.
just
Yeah.
yeah, very convenient. Yeah, considering where VR was only even a year or two ago,
Hmm.
to see where it is now, especially with Oculus, is incredible. But what do you feel are some of the features or key elements of medium, for instance, that people maybe overlook, or something that you have found about the software that people wouldn't already know from using it?
Um, I think just the thing that's hard to communicate with showing these 2D videos on the screen of my medium works, for
Hmm.
example, is the fact that it feels like it's there in front of you when you're in medium, right?
Right. Yeah.
And I think people see those videos and they see, like, oh yeah, well, it's a 3D thing, like in ZBrush or Forger. Is it
Yeah.
Forger? Yeah.
Yeah.
Um, but the ability when you have that headset
Yeah.
on you to be in the same physical space, virtual physical space as your sculpt or model,
Yeah.
and then you're able to kind of scale that to say King Kong size, like
Right.
several stories high, and then look at it from
Yeah.
that context. I think is something that excuse me,
Mhm.
people aren't really considering. Like I've always been kind of preaching that for say film production, for
Mhm.
example, right? Like if you're a concept artist concepting
Mhm.
a character like Thanos or a Navi for Avatar,
Right.
they're a certain size, a scale that you would need to sculpt for that scale so that it looks good on camera, and to
Right.
be able to see it in the context of a physical maquette, may it be
Mhm.
digital, albeit digital. It's very convenient because then you can be rest assured that if you give that file to say Legacy Effects
Mhm.
to 3D print out or whatever, there's
Yeah.
no sort of inaccuracies with the camera settings. Like say, for example, ZBrush or Maya, like
Mhm.
the focal length was off, and so
Yeah.
the creature looks a little bit different, maybe thinner
Mhm.
or wider. So
Right.
you're eliminating a lot of that because you're looking at it from the context of scale, which is really useful.
Right.
And the most important thing for me is you can look at things. You could look at volumes in the
Mhm.
round versus just being limited by the flat screen.
Yes.
And as someone who deals with 3D or sculpts, that is a very important aspect of visualizing and executing form. That extra added depth is just so important. Like I can actually properly gauge how the silhouette turns and assess
Mhm.
from there and look around, like moving my body around, being
Mhm.
physical, like moving around, the act of moving around your legs, your neck, your whole body,
Mhm.
versus just statically sitting with your Wacom tablet. Um, it makes a difference. And so there's a lot of these sort of things that I think people, when they look at VR art, they just go,
Yeah.
"Ah, it's a gimmick," which
Mhm.
I've heard a lot of. But I think they don't realize that it actually is there for a huge advantage, and it's the advantage is it brings you as close as you can to your works as a physical object. And
Yes.
like that should be the end goal, right? Of visualizing your work, digital work, I
Mhm.
should say. So.
Yeah. I think it's also, a lot of people's dream, even when you talk about maybe environment artists as well, where
Hmm.
I knew for VR initially, a couple of guys I knew who were working down in the film industry in London, they were using, prefabricated stuff they would make in Cinema 4D or any other 3D program. And they were physically putting the headsets on directors so that they could walk about the sets,
Hmm.
uh, previs a lot of that action before it took place, before they had to build sets physically. So I think, like you talk about the scale, the being within, senior models live up, and even maybe when you were sculpting the Hulk in medium, having the ability to blow him up, to this whole
Oh
Hulk
yeah,
size.
yeah.
Yeah, it's just again, I think it's also just a previs of stuff that's in VR anyway. Because I know for me, when I was using my VR headset, and people would ask me, "What's it like to play a game or experience stuff?" I would be like, it's always hard to describe that. You really need to put a headset on and experience that for yourself, because it really is hard to describe to people unless they've had a headset on their head. Because it does feel, even within the gaming space or whatever else, it does feel like you're there. One of the most, I think, realized games that came out recently was The Walking Dead: Saints and Sinners for the Vive, or for just VR in general, and or stuff like Vader Immortal. Like
Hmm.
when you're in those types of experiences, it's almost one to one. and it's hard to tell people like how real it feels. But then when you have the headsets on, you lose all sense of, if you've played a game for long enough, or you've sculpted long enough, you've done anything in VR long enough, and you take the headset off, right, you almost have this moment where you're like, oh yeah, I'm in my living room or I'm in my office. Like
Yeah.
I forgot where I was for like an instance. So, but then I think also the good thing with VR sculpting, especially because you're using your hands, I don't know if you feel the same, but when I've used it, it almost crosses that line between, it's building on those fundamental foundation skills of sculpting by hand and clay. Do you feel like that's a good reference of like where medium sits for you? Do you feel like it's more traditional tools rather than digital? Do you feel like you have that hand built feel when you're using medium?
Oh yeah, I mean totally. It kind of my approach in medium is different versus ZBrush because of it. Like ZBrush, it's more of a drawing um,
Right.
sort of approach because of the well the medium you're using. The
Yeah.
Wacom is patterned after pen and paper, right?
Yeah.
And so it's strokes based
Hmm.
versus medium where you're actually your motor skills are more involved. You're moving your arms, your body,
Hmm.
just as you would with like a Play-Doh. Let's say a child to a
Yeah.
Play-Doh. That's
Hmm.
the most simple analogy we could use right now, but it's
Yep.
super accurate. It's like working with clay or Play-Doh even, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And there's a difference in approach because of that. But also I wanted to kind of comment on like other things that I think artists should consider outside of the production aspect of medium, kind of
Right.
touching a little bit on that because the things that we touched on earlier are more like
Hmm.
Vader Immortal or like
Hmm.
working visualizing scale for production. All
Right.
that is on the production end, but I kind of wanted to append to that like
Hmm.
medium as an artist, you as an artist, and how you communicate your art, the art that you do with it,
Right.
and how to show that off. The ability to put someone in a space where they're surrounded by a scene that you've created from your imagination to VR.
Yep.
That is a powerful thing, and it's allowed me to kind of think up more of stories versus like just oh, this is a T-pose character in
Hmm.
solitary against a gray background, like
Yeah.
it allows me to, as an artist, to kind of be more involved and be active with my imagination to come up with stories and
Right.
scenarios and just interesting scenes to
Hmm.
create versus just like production minded, like I'm just going to
Yeah.
do one solitary monster, which I think is a very important thing for artists, especially
Hmm.
especially those of us who come from production like myself.
Yeah.
I want to ignite. I want a catalyst for my imagination for me to be able to do do more story based things, and I think
Yeah.
medium will do that to you. So
Yeah. I think it's also playing on the idea we talked about earlier, where the guys I know in the film industry were setting the directors up to walk about those virtual sets, and I think it's also what you're talking about, where you can realize those things in first person, whereas sitting, even opening a file in a 3D software and pointing to buildings and be like, oh yeah, and this will be here and this will, but then
mhm.
physically being able to walk about that space, or like you said, even say back, when you were at ILM, if you'd had the opportunity to build the Hulk and then fire him into, a New York scene and have one of the directors put a headset on and be like, here's what it'll look like, here's the scale it'll be, here's how
Mhm.
tall it'll be compared to Iron Man or Captain America.
Yeah,
Would have been groundbreaking at that point, right? Would have been something that you would have never thought would have been a possible, especially with the limits of technology. But now, I think it's getting more and more possible that those tools will start to become integrated within production pipelines, because I don't think, I don't know enough about Medium probably to know this, but do you feel yourself, having used it and being in a production background, do you feel like Medium could be integrated in the near future into either film or game production pipelines?
oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, it is integrated right now. Like, there's a lot of game companies who are using it, concept
Hmm.
artists. In fact, if you go to the Oculus Medium artist group. I don't know exactly where to. They've been posting like, oh, these are some of the game companies that are using it.
Right.
I mean, like I think maybe even uh, yeah, in current films it's been used. So I mean, it's out there.
Yeah.
It's being integrated in pipelines.
Right.
Yeah, so people are
Because you can
realizing its
export.
value. So yeah.
Yeah, totally. Because you can export those models as any standard kind of industry
Mhm.
file that exists within stuff like ZBrush or Max or Maya or, like your OBJ, your CTL
Oh yeah,
files.
yeah.
Yeah,
My
yeah,
my
yeah.
process has been blocking it into Medium, pump it through ZBrush, Substance. Oh, I'm not happy with it. Pump it back from ZBrush back to Medium because you can import an OBJ and convert that back into a Medium SDF mesh.
Okay.
So it should be seamless, just like it plugs into any pipeline, just as ZBrush would, or
Mhm.
anything really. Yeah.
It would definitely be interesting to see, I think, because for a lot of guys I know who are character based, a lot of them do come from, not all, but there is a select few who come from traditional backgrounds, so they've worked exclusively in clay sculpting in the past, and then worked their way up through ZBrush. And I think it's even interesting now how, again, mentioning Yama, but also because I think Yama has been at the forefront of a lot of the VR stuff as well. But then his clay brushes and a lot of the clay brush renders that are now coming out, you see that cross back into traditional skills like we are talking about, and how people are viewing it as a way to be able to sculpt traditionally, but also without the mess of the clay renders. But then now that it's integrated into production pipelines, it'll be interesting to see how the industry moves forward, where people aren't shackled to their desks anymore. They can be more free. I know even of some concept artists who not even talk about 3D but 2D have been using VR to paint and draw digitally in a 2D space as well, because the tools are so intuitive. So but then where do you see, or what do you think the next maybe evolutionary leap is going to be for the VR space for artists particularly? Do you feel like there's a next step that people aren't kind of seeing or aren't maybe fully aware of yet that you know of, or something? Obviously, it's good in the things you're currently working on, but anything that you've maybe seen in the community even that's or production that's kind of interested you?
I don't know if I can comment specifically on where VR is headed, but where I
Right.
wish for it to head on the art side of things
Yeah.
is more on the educational front, where I can be doing workshops in
Hmm.
VR, teaching. That's always been my passion, and has been one of my goals. In fact, I did try doing that with Mold 3D with a VR workshop that we did. I think it's one of the first, if not the first, VR art workshop where the
Okay.
students were there physically.
Yeah.
Um, so, but doing that in VR, I think something I would wish to see,
Yeah.
sometime. I don't know when.
But yeah, because you've done that previously, even with I think on your Instagram you posted that you had been invited along to, for example, the most recent one I saw was Blizzard, where you had a workshop
Hmm.
there specifically. I don't know if you can talk to what you were teaching at that time, but was it a kind of just walk through medium where you kind of just laying down the foundations of how people can use it, maybe even within production, or was it just a basic of what VR sculpting is, or
Oh yeah, no, I mean the workshops I can definitely talk about. I was
yeah,
just you know showing them pretty much basics of Medium first. Obviously, they need to kind of know the
get
software
to
to be
grips
able
with
to
it?
use the software. Yeah,
Yeah.
and then show the process. And at that point,
Hmm.
I pretty much always, when I do these workshops, I try not to make the workshop about the software, but rather using the software as a
Hmm.
means to talk about more of the art focused theories and techniques,
Yeah.
maybe ZBrush or Medium. So I
Right.
would show them sort of like how to create form in Medium using the layer system,
Right.
and showing them the advantages of perhaps character creation in Medium. You have this ability to control it
Hmm.
if you go about it this way.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's more along those lines, those workshops.
Yeah. I mean, it's interesting as well that you have a sense where you can go to these workshops and teach people VR, but then I think it's like anything where, I can remember who I was watching at the time, but a streamer who was using ZBrush was talking to a student, and he was kind of asking, should I start in ZBrush, or is there something else I should use? Should I use this program or this technique or this tablet? And like the guy was saying, which is very apparent to most students, is that your core fundamentals will always be there. If ZBrush disappeared tomorrow, and something else took its place, the interface would take a day or two to get used to. But beyond that, you're still sculpting the same, you're still building forms the same, you're still focusing on shape. So like, for a lot of guys, once the VR tools or the medium tools kind of, are evaporated and they're not paying attention to them anymore, your artistic, abilities are already there. You just have to relearn the software. I think it was interesting when I talked about Procreate back in the day, and why I loved it so much was because compared to Photoshop, Procreate almost got out of the road and let you just draw, let you just be artistic, where Medium, I think, is serving the same purpose, where there's less interface and there's less focus on menus, and it's more just about creating. I don't know if, is that how you feel with Medium? Is that something you've noticed since coming from ZBrush as well?
Yeah. I mean, at a certain point, even with ZBrush, things just become invisible because you just know it. Like, even though it takes many clicks to get to a certain
menu,
operation, you kind of your body builds a tolerance for it. But yeah, with Medium, it feels like a little more invisible because it's just you in the space with certain things that you need to click to, obviously. But it's more immediate. It's more
immediate.
Immediate.
More responsive. I did feel that anyway with the ZBrush especially. I think it almost follows the 80-20 rule, where 80% of the time you're using 20% of the interface, because although ZBrush is a menu monster, there is only maybe 5 or 6 key features that like Dynamesh, for instance, there's only a few select buttons that you'll need to go back to time and time again. So interesting that again, the VR space, and you're exploring that, and you're teaching now. And I mean, it's interesting to see. I think even, at this point, I think because the software is so thought out, the only next step is, of course, the headsets that change, and, the future of those as well. And especially with, the way Oculus is kind of comprise itself as one of the industry leaders for VR headsets. But then it's interesting where I think it's almost like you talked about the production side of it as well. Is there anything else that, you feel that people also miss about Medium, or anything else you would want to cover specifically on the tool set?
No, I think we covered a good deal on it. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Okay. So moving past even just your work and what is it that's kind of driving you from day to day now? On you've got your work at Oculus, you're doing that. You've had this film career behind you. Although you kind of got this, your plate full doing that. Basically, it's a full-time job. You're still very active in Medium. You're still active in posting a lot on Instagram as well. What is it your kind of focus at the moment, personal wise? Is there projects that you're following? Is it just a constant need to try and get better? Is that something else that you're following as well with anatomy and studies?
I'm all over the place, I think, but my main goal essentially is to just be better. That's always been my main goal from day one of doing this, just being open and being better. And I think just experimenting with a lot of things, Medium obviously, but I'm also just in as much as in ZBrush as in Medium. I intend to be in Substance and then Unreal, doing more of that stuff, and as well as collaborating with people who I respect and admire, just to, of course, especially in these days of pandemics and quarantines, like just being solitary is, as an artist, is not, I mean, it's good for certain things, but I think being social, collaborating with other artists can also be a good thing. So I intend on doing that more, and just kind of like just trying to be better overall. I mean, that's sort of a cliche thing to say, isn't it? But it's so true.
No, of course, but it's something we all strive for, and I think it's always good to hear that in people, that you always are trying to get better. Even guys at your level, where you think know that you've plateaued, of course, but you feel like you have enough knowledge of certain subjects. But then it's always, especially I think anatomy, it's one of these things. I think even I was watching Jim Lee draw on Twitch at one point, and people were like, "Oh yeah, you've mastered anatomy. You know how to draw people back." And he's like, "Dude, I'm still learning all these years later." And Jim Lee's one of the biggest, for characters, especially in comics. But then, of course, now you're talking about the streaming side of it as well, and being more social on that end of it. Is that something that you've got planned for the future as well? Are you looking to expand and maybe start streaming or building online classes? And maybe not talk too much, if you're building something in the background, but is there anything in particular that you think you're going to be pushing going forward?
Yeah, no, I mean, I think all of the above, right? I want to definitely
Right.
be a lot more involved with streaming,
Mm-hmm.
just showing a little bit more of my process,
Yep.
especially with the VR thing, since it's so new.
Right.
And people do have questions,
Mm-hmm.
I can kind of like answer whatever
Mm-hmm.
hesitation they may have and all that stuff. So I do want to do more live stream of that, and ZBrush too. And
Yeah.
also, uh, yeah, kind of just being more involved socially with people. And,
Yeah.
I've been given this good opportunity to have a platform with Instagram, and people are
Mm-hmm.
curious and they seem to like the work that I do and have questions. And so I
Yep.
just want to be more involved in answering those questions and helping out in the most optimal way. And I think maybe live stream or something, or I don't know, podcasts would
Yeah.
work.
Well, you're taking your first steps here, Gio. You've
Yeah,
you've you've,
baby
you've broken.
steps. Yeah.
Yeah. You're in the podcast space now. There's no return. But yeah, I think that's definitely an interesting space, and I think Raf has been one of the guys who's almost at the forefront of that, because you look at his Instagram, he's on 500,000 plus
Oh
followers.
yeah, he's
Uh,
amazing.
he's kind of found the formula now where he's sculpting the childhood stuff. Batman he's done the whole mob from them, and building stuff in ZBrush in like a day now, and yeah. But I think there was a great opportunity that Raf had last year also when he started those character classes. People were super interested because I do feel like that is from my end of it as a student looking at the industry. There is no lack, but there's almost not as much character stuff out there tutorial wise as there is, say, environment art, concept art, other stuff. I feel like character stuff is there's only a select few people teaching it right now, and then if they're not putting out new content, every year or every so often when the software changes, then you do struggle to find good sources. One I have noticed has been really good is the Flip Normal guys.
Mhm.
Um, those two guys were initially or previously digital negative DNeg, and they had worked there as creature artists for a lot of stuff. I think actually the last thing they both worked on was possibly Infinity War or Endgame.
Mhm.
But now they're out teaching people. They've got their own website. They're teaching people ZBrush. They're teaching. They've got a whole ZBrush 2020 intro to for beginners. And yeah, there's a lot of that stuff out there. But like I says, there's a lack of top tier teaching is what I'm probably getting at. Like when Raft has a class, I think that's why there was an interest, because there's a lack of people at the higher level teaching that stuff. There's a lot of people who will teach ZBrush who are, not that they're worse or less better, but they've not had maybe huge production experience. They've not been involved in AAA production for games or movies. So it's good to see. I think if you ventured into that space, you're definitely going to see a lot of interest, because you have this previous knowledge, plus now you're delving into new technology. I think as much as I've been on Twitch and its creative section, I haven't seen hardly anybody using the VR software medium. I think it's mostly, you will get people in ZBrush, but it's very rare you
Yeah,
see anybody using the VR stuff. So that almost could be a niche that you could build on for your streaming technology. So
yeah,
yeah, a lot to look forward to, Gio. So yeah, we're kind of getting towards that time, and it's been great talking to you, Gio. I've really loved having you on, and
yeah. No, it's been
thank you
great.
again for coming on and giving up your time. It was a real honor speaking to you. And if you want to come back on at any point, I'll be happy to be your second time on a podcast, not just your first. So.
Yeah, no, I mean, it's just like having a conversation, isn't it? It's easy.
Yeah, man. Yeah. I think
That's
it's
that's what
probably.
podcasts are about then, I guess.
Yeah, well, they've got to be. I think if you're kind of doing the thing where you're reading like a script or you're trying to answer questions
Yeah.
one after after the other, it becomes a bit stale. So, but it's been interesting to just dive into not only your career but your views on VR, and of course, there's only certain stuff you can talk about. You're working on these great, amazing projects.
I'm always super safe. Try to be super safe.
Yeah, of course, you've got to be in this industry. But yeah, definitely thanks again for coming on. And if you guys have got any questions for Gio, or you want to ask him anything, I'll leave his details and his websites and other things below. You can get in contact. Like he says, he's trying to be more social, so hopefully if you reach out with a couple of questions, of course, always being respectful and polite, I'm sure Gio will get back to you at one point and help you if he can. And if there's any content in the future that Gio's putting out, I'm sure we will publicize it through Digital Artcast. If you guys don't know, also, if you check down in the description, there's some links, affiliate links to CubeRush and their marketplace, also to our Discord that we have. At the moment, we are 100 plus strong at the moment, and a couple of good guys in there posting art regularly and having conversations. So if you want to improve or meet a community of artists, you can always join the Digital Artcast Discord. And we also have the Twitch stream, YouTube channel. We're on multiple different podcast outlets, including Anchor, iTunes Podcasts, Spotify, Google Podcasts. So loads of places you can find us. And of course, as always, stay tuned, subscribe, and make sure that you check out our next episode. Thanks again to Gio. And
thank you.
Yeah, indeed. And to you guys for listening. Hope you have an awesome time, especially during these lockdown periods. And again, any questions, drop them in the comments. And we'll speak to you guys later. Bye.
Bye. Thank you.